All right, guys, welcome to your first ed puzzle lesson. Here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to do a little recap about parts of expressions, and then we're going to jump into actually our first full new lesson for the year, which is going to be solving equations. You're going to have some homework or practice from your textbook on page 8, and I'll post this again at the end of the video and also on Schoology, but it's going to be on page 8, numbers 3 through 9, just the odd ones. That way you can check your answers once you're finished, but also kind of just take note of which ones maybe you had to correct or got wrong so you can ask questions next time I see you. So while I'm going through these in the video, I want you to be taking notes in your notebook or on a piece of paper so that you can go back to them. You can also rewind the video at any point to watch me do something again. So remember, you can go back. You can't skip ahead though. So let's get started. So first thing we're talking about is an expression. Now, an expression has a few parts, as you see here, and I'm going to just identify each of the parts of the expression. So the X or any letter you might see, these are our variables. Okay, so this is one of our vocab words we're going to use a lot. So when we have a letter that's representing a number, that's a variable. When you have a number that sits by itself, it's called a constant. And the number that is being multiplied by our variable, the number that sits out front here, that's a coefficient. So if you ever hear me ask you for what's the coefficient, that's the number in front of your variable. Okay? And this whole thing, the 3x plus 4, everything all together, that's our expression. Okay? And the difference between an expression and an equation is the equal sign. So an expression does not have an answer attached to it, an equation does. So I'm going to ask you to identify the parts of this expression, negative 5y plus 7. So negative 5 would have been your coefficient. Okay. Since it's in front of your y, which is your variable. And remember, the number that sits by itself is a constant. Now switching gears to an equation, okay, so see the equal sign arrived. When you have an equal sign, it's always going to be an equation. And when the directions or someone says solve the equation, what they're really asking is what value of y, or whatever your variable is, what value of that variable makes the equation true? So what number can we plug in instead of y that when we subtract 11, we get 7 back? That's what it's asking. To solve equations, to actually figure out your answer, and we're going to start with these one-step equations, but our goal is to isolate the variable, okay? So you want, our answer should look like y equals, and hopefully we get some number, okay? So it's isolated when the variable is all by itself. And in order to do that, we're going to go through the order of operations, but we're going to go backwards. So we're actually going to start with addition and subtraction. Then we'll do multiplication and division, and we'll go from there. Okay. So for this first equation here, there we go. My goal is to get 11 by itself. And to do that, okay, I'm going to split mine down through the equal sign, because whatever you do to one side, you must do to the other side. And when we go through our order of operations and we're going backwards, we want to undo everything, okay? Or do the opposite. So because I'm subtracting 11 from y, my first step is actually going to be add 11 to both sides. So again, whatever I do to one side, I must do to the other. So when I have negative 11 plus 11, those cancel out. All I have left on the left is a y. And on the right side, I have 7 plus 11, which gets me 18. And that's my answer. And I can always do a quick check by plugging in my answer to the original equation. So now I'm going to do 18 minus 11, and that gets me 7. And that's what I wanted. So here's our next one. X minus 6 equals 4. So I'm looking for a number that when I subtract 6 from it will get me to 4. So I'm going to undo the subtraction by adding 6 to both sides. And on the left side, that leaves me with just x. And on the right, it gets me 10. So again, I can do my check and say 10 minus 6. That got me 4, and that's exactly what I was hoping for. Now this one's a little different just because the order of the equation, my variable is coming second. Now that does not change how I'm going to solve it, but it might change how I look at the problem. Because this positive 7 out front, I could think of that as if it's a plus 7 plus x equals 13. So if there's no negative out front, you know it's positive. And to undo that or get rid of my positive 7, all I have to do is subtract 7 from both sides. All right. So 7 minus 7 cancels to 0, which means I've got x equals, and I'm doing 13 minus 7, which gets me 6. And I do my check and say, okay, what's 7 plus 6? It's 13, which is exactly what I wanted. We can also do one-step solves, which is what we're doing because they only require one step to solve, with multiplication and division. So hopefully you remember from going over our summer packet that we can write numbers and variables right next to each other, and that implies multiplication. So I have 2 times x equals negative 24. I'm following the same rules. I have nothing to add to my variable or subtract from it, because remember, my goal is to get this x by itself, which means to do that, I have to get rid of the 2 that's being multiplied. And to undo multiplication, I'm going to divide each side by 2. And when I divide on each side by 2, okay, on the left, I've got 2 divided by 2 with an x. Oops. And on the right side, I've got negative 24 divided by 2. So on the left, I'm left with just x. And on the right side, I have negative 12. And you can still check these answers the same way by plugging it back in. So if I do 2 times negative 12, that still gets me the negative 24 that I was hoping for. Okay. My next one here using division. Whoops. So I've got x divided by 4 equals negative 12. I want x by itself. To get x by itself, I have to undo division, which means I'm going to multiply by 4 on both sides. So on the left, my 4's cancel, and I have just x. And on the right, I'm doing negative 12 times 4, which is negative 48. Do my check. Negative 48 divided by 4 gets me negative 12. All right, because I know we loved doing all the fraction practice last week, I made sure to include some fractions here. And I hope you're getting more comfortable with fractions early on because we're going to see them all year long. They do not go away. So for this one, I've got 9x over 4. And to undo a fraction or get rid of a fraction, we can always multiply it by its reciprocal. And the reciprocal of a fraction is always the fraction just flipped. So you switch the numerator and the denominator. So I'm going to multiply both sides of my equation here by 4 over 9. Okay. And the reason the reciprocal works is because if you're multiplying your fractions, so I'm doing 4/9 times 9 over 4, and yes, there's an x here. This really comes out to be 36x over 36. And those 36 values in the numerator and denominator cancel each other out. And all I'm left with is the x. So that's my left side of the equation. I'm going to kind of squiggle it around here. So I've got x equals, and to go to the right side, this negative 9 that I'm multiplying by, you can always write an integer over 1 if you don't have a denominator. And now I can do negative 9 over 1 times 4 over 9. And just as a refresher, your fraction multiplication, you go straight across. So negative 9 times 4 gets me negative 36. And 1 times 9 gets me positive 9. So I'm going to bring my fraction down. But I hope you're all looking at this fraction and thinking, Miss Best, you told us last time we saw you, we should always simplify. So hopefully you're getting ready to simplify your fraction and you're trying to think of factors of 36 and 9. Well, I know 3 goes into both of those numbers. So I'm going to divide by 3 up top and I'm going to divide by 3 in the bottom, which gets me negative 12 over 3. And I can still do it again and divide each by 3. And that would get me negative 4 over 1. Or you can just write x equals negative 4. And when we go back to the beginning to do our check, so I've got 9 times negative 4 divided by 4, which is negative 36 divided by 4, and that gets us negative 9, which is exactly the answer we started with and we're hoping for. I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal of 3/4, which is 4/3 on both sides. On the left side of my fraction, I know it's going to cancel out, but just so you can see my work, I'm doing 4 over 3 times 3x over 4, which is going to be 12x over 12, or just x. And on the right side, I'm going to put my 6 over a 1 And now I am ready to do 6 over 1 times 4 over 3. And remember, we go straight across. So 6 times 4 is 24. 1 times 3 is 3. And remember, fractions are just another way of writing division. So 24 divided by 3 will get us 8. And I'm going to go back and check my answer. So 3 times 8 over 4 will get me 24 over 4, or 24 divided by 4, which is 6, exactly what we wanted.